3 years ago, I was here. There was a conference at the University of St. Thomas Law School. The conference was Exploring Public Corruption, Its Causes, Consequences, and Remedies. And political corruption is my beat, so I came up for it. And there was an air of disbelief in the room, like, why are we doing this? Minnesota's not corrupt. And there's a local defense attorney, Joseph Freeberg. I looked up my notes because I wanted to quote him. He said, "The bribes that are talked about here would be considered insults in Chicago rather than bribes. If I specialized in defending cases of public corruption, I would starve to death." So there we go. Minnesota is proud of its reputation for clean government, and I think that pride has something to do with the resistance that this second fraud story has gotten here. If you came to Chicago and said, your legal system is corrupt, well, yeah, what else is new? You come here and say that, and that message is not welcomed. That message has not been welcomed now. Bill, how I personally got involved, I heard about the second fraud sometime last fall, and my girlfriend is a lawyer, and I said, I heard about this case today. The bankrupt criminal guy's corporate attorney is also the criminal bankrupt guy's receiver and the bankrupt guy's bankruptcy trustee. And she said, oh no, that's impossible. No, you must have misunderstood. And I said, no, there's this case in Minnesota. And she said, no court in the country would do that. You're wrong. And that's when I knew I had a book here.
Let's go over to Billy Procida because, as Billy said, he doesn't need a microphone. Billy, you've been involved in a lot of bankruptcy action over the years. Can you run down for us, and there's never enough time in a documentary to get in all the things that people have to say. You were there in the early days of this. Can you tell us again what the distinctions are between a corporate attorney, a receiver, a trustee, and exactly what transpired in those immediate days right after this fraud was uncovered?
Well, first off, we got no mic again. First off, I have never, ever, I don't think it's ever been done before, I don't think ever has a criminal's attorney been appointed receiver, and I've never seen a receiver also be a trustee. It just doesn't happen. It's like if a company goes bankrupt, their lawyer doesn't get to do anything other than represent the company. Never do they get to become the receiver and or trustee. This matter was much more ridiculous, and this is probably the biggest misuse of justice I have ever seen in my career. I remember after getting appointed receiver, am I on? I remember after getting appointed receiver, I called Kelly, I flew in, he picked the most expensive restaurant in town. I gave him my strategy, which was going to be unique, because there were so many victims that lost so much money. I had all of these investment funds were willing to volunteer staff. Because my first thing I said was, this thing will cost a fortune unless we get some people from the creditor side to work for free. Plus, they know where the money is. He ordered the most expensive bottle of wine, the most expensive restaurant. We were supposed to meet again at 9 o'clock in the morning. As he got up, I noticed the check was right there. He invited me. And I got stuck with the check. That was my first thing. Then we're supposed to meet at 9 in the morning. I called him at 9. He said I call every hour. I called at 9. I called at 10. I sat in his office. This was the next day we were supposed to meet. The strategy was, hey, you know Minnesota, you know the court system. I know how to run companies. I'll do this. Let me take some of the staff that I'm getting, is being volunteered, and you go deal with all this criminal stuff. Never heard from him. Then people started coming to me like there were all these guys in black suits and, CIA-looking types. And it was basically a kind of a very shadowy thing. I was in the South Bronx in construction for 15 years, so I don't scare too easy. Believe it or not, I was actually nervous being in Minnesota working on the Bettors game. And then then that meeting happened where he walked in with 8 attorneys. And then really where the misuse of justice came, and I'll be brief, but I walk in with an attorney into Judge Montgomery's court. We prepared for 10 hours, at least. My lawyer had an entire yellow notebook ready to make his presentation. So I walked in with one attorney. Hettler walks in, and by the way, the most amazing thing, he hasn't been hired yet. So think about it. While I was receiver, Venom and, what's it called? Venom and, Link was in Venom? There was 8 attorneys he was using their offices. He wasn't even the receiver yet. He walked into the courtroom with no less than a dozen attorneys. After all of his chummy, hi, smile with Judge Montgomery, he got at least a half hour, 40 minutes to make his case about everything. Finally gets to my attorney, and you would have thought I was appointed by a judge in Illinois at the bequest of a dozen creditors representing $2 billion. You would think the judge would want to at least say, hey, Mr. Presida, can I talk? Who are you? Not only did the judge not ask for any testimony from me as to my credentials, background, or any of the creditors that were standing in the courtroom, as my lawyer gets up, and we had a Minnesota lawyer, so I thought I wasn't going to get completely home job, he is 30 seconds into his dissertation. And the judge goes, you have a minute to wrap up. If that is not criminal, I don't know what is.
I'd like to address this to the whole panel, but we're getting a lot of questions up here about what should have happened in this case. For instance, how was it handled differently in other cases, or the Madoff case? How should this have happened so that these abuses could have been prevented? Professor?
Nothing works. I'm new to Minnesota. I've been here 3 years. I've been a member of the New York bar for 20 years, and I've practiced law there. And I've been in Washington, D.C., swum with the sharks there, and been a number of places. I'm not going to say anything about whether the facts in this film are true or not. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you that if just half of the facts are true, you've got a major problem here. What I want to talk about is how the world should work, whether or not it worked that way in this case. And there are 3 concerns. One is forfeiture. In forfeiture, the United States government is coming in and taking private property. It is appropriate, it is right for the government to take private property away from criminals if the private property represents the proceeds of the criminal activity. You have someone who engages in criminal activity and buys $1 million house out on Lake Minnetonka, and they own the house, the United States government comes in and takes it. Okay. But if there's an $800,000 mortgage on that house owned by U.S. Bank, what the government's entitled to is a $200,000 difference, the equity owned by the criminal, not to the security interest. So the important thing about forfeiture is that the government use forfeiture appropriately to get at the assets of the criminals and the people who help criminals engage in their criminal activity, not other people, not innocent creditors and other third parties. The power of the government is enormous, and we need, in a democracy, to protect ourselves against abuse of that power. And I'm not saying whether it happened in this case or not. I'm new to these facts. I've looked at this movie. Obviously, I'm very concerned about what I saw here, but it's important that we as citizens focus on whether forfeiture law is being used appropriately or being misused. Second, we need to think very seriously about the bankruptcy system in the United States, and there are many cases where we find the professional fees. And I'm a lawyer. I have nothing against lawyers' fees. But I do. You know, we shouldn't get everything. you know, it's happened for many, many years, where you have a bankruptcy, and Lehman Brothers now, we see this back in New York, and a whole bunch of the others where the lawyers' fees are enormous. We have to come up with a system where the assets, what assets there are in a bankruptcy, go to the creditors, not everything to the lawyers. And, you know, one of the ways to try and deal with that is to have clear rules. You have a security interest or you don't. It's not, well, you maybe have a security interest, maybe you don't. We're going to spend a year or two or three arguing about it, and then there's nothing left to fight over anyway. We need to have clear rules here. And if bankruptcy law isn't working in the United States, whether it's this case or any of the other cases I've talked about, we need to fix that. Bankruptcy law is not there for the benefit of the lawyers. It's there for the benefit of the public. And the third concern I have is conflicts of interest. It is critical that when people are put in charge of receivership, acting on behalf of the United States government, or a trustee in bankruptcy, that that person be free of any conflicts of interest, not have prior relationships with the individuals involved who have perpetrated criminal activity. It is critical that there be independence. And as I say, I have not looked at the underlying facts here, but you saw the movie. The movie has said what it said. But finding out what the facts are in this case and the many other cases around the country is, I think, of critical importance.
Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, it was a very comprehensive discussion, and I guess what I would add is a couple things. One, it may seem almost incredible what we saw, and I've written about this a couple times in the last week, most recently on the Huffington Post today. And as a journalist, also an attorney, but functioning as a journalist, you're trying to get the facts. Well, what am I missing? Maybe the creditors were really investing somehow. But I guess what I'd say is that the movie is very well documented, to my understanding, after looking at this now for quite intensively for a number of weeks. On the website of Jim, he's got the first 2 chapters of his book. There's a lot of legal materials that are out there. And it's not just that these facts, I think, are documented, but I'd like to say that there are examples around the country of similar situations that are percolating that people don't really realize, because this stuff is complicated, but I've been poking into. And a great example I'll close with is that as I was looking into situations where people were being framed on criminal charges, and in one case I'll mention that I've spent a lot of time in, Alabama, the federal judge was in on it. And I started it as kind of a reporter thinking that there were due process problems. No, the judge was in on it. And then the pivotal thing, and I brought a prop or two here, but I went to a conference where I found authors who have written scholarly books about this kind of problem. And I'll just mention this one now by Paul Craig Roberts, The Tyranny of Good Intentions. It's got an entire chapter on the problem of forfeiture that is present in this case. This book was written in 2000. It was republished this year. And here's the larger point that I'll close on, is that this situation is incredibly dramatic, hurtful here, but there are similar situations around the country, and very important authors have said that this Justice Department is not operating the way we think it should be. I mean, down in Alabama here, they should be having grand juries looking into this. They should be bringing people in and saying, okay, we want to know what was said in these cases, who said what to whom, and they don't want to do it. And that's a huge problem, and if there was somebody with guts who was, you started in Washington, but you can go back here, and you'd say, why aren't you doing it? And maybe, if I can just take maybe 15 more seconds. For 5 years, I covered the Justice Department full-time as a reporter at the Hartford Courant in Connecticut, another state that had a great reputation for being clean, good government. And one of the things I found covering the courts was that bankruptcy and probate law are particularly vulnerable to this sense that, oh, we'll just pick an expert, everyone knows it's a good person, a friend of the judge. Well, what's going on in those two cases is you have a lot of assets with no clear owner. And I did exposés on judges in Connecticut, and there's no such thing as too honest, too good to be immune to the kind of money we're talking about right here.
A lot of assets with no clear owner, that's a lawyer's dream.
There's a lot of questions here that are addressed to Thane Ritchie, and I've been doing, I read a lot of the press leading up to this. And the gist of some of these questions and the gist of the press is that it's basically that even though you organize this group of creditors, the notion seems to be that, let's face it, you're a rich guy. The investment group is made up of wealthy investors, and if you all got scammed, so wasn't it your job to find out that Best Buy wasn't actually selling this stuff? How do you respond to people who say that?
I think you asked a few different questions there, but I think that the basic way I would answer that is it becomes a victimless crime. The second fraud becomes a victimless crime if you accuse the victims of being stupid or greedy or selfish or from out of state or rich hedge fund managers or those kind of things. And I don't think that's kind of really misses the point of the movie, I guess, is that this is wrong. It's wrong for a lot of reasons, and frankly, this is not going to affect my life one way or another. My largest investor is one of the largest pension funds in town here. It has tens of thousands. I'll bet you somebody in this room is part of that pension fund, if not a good portion of this room is related or has friends that are part of that pension fund. It may change their lives. It certainly changes Janet Leck's life. And when I came up here, I talked to Mary Jeffries, and I met with Ted Mondale and other people in town, and former assistant attorney general that was working for Petters, and he had a reputation for being a billionaire. He had snowed a lot of people, apparently, and he had a facade. There's no question about that. We were careful about the way we actually loaned money to Petters, and I think that part of the sham is they've tried to fabricate some things that just are not in evidence. But I think that the major point of this is it's very easy. I saw a Ponzi scheme in Africa that came out over the last, I think, few months, and the government was being accused of being part of the Ponzi scheme, and so they pointed the finger back and said, well, really, there's no victims here because they were all greedy and they were all stupid, and so it's a victimless crime. And if it's a victimless crime, I think a combination of you put the assets in doubt of who the owner is and you have no victims, then it's very easy for everybody else to walk off with the money. And that's just wrong. It's wrong by every standard, and it's the kind of thing you'd expect in Venezuela or under dictatorship, but you don't expect in the United States of America. And I think that's the way it is.
And by the way, it's easier to check people out when the government doesn't expunge their record.
Anybody ever get a record expunged? I can't.
There's a couple questions here for Ryan.
Many times. In fact, Mr. Kelly himself invited me to film the footage we did have of him. Unfortunately, we were not ever able to sit down and do a formal interview where we could ask him direct questions.
And the other question is probably from a filmmaker, but it's every filmmaker seems, especially documentarians, don't get to get everything in the movie that they would like to get. Otherwise, this would be 4 hours long or longer. What's the one thing that you wish you could have gotten into the movie that you didn't get in?
Yeah, absolutely. You should have seen some of the conversations I had with my editor. I believe the original cut was 4 hours long, if not somewhere around there. And then we started having to just cut stuff out. And that was a fun conversation, because when you talk to an editor, he's the one who's putting all the story pieces together, and every second in a film represents a lot of work for an editor. So he had a lot of fun with that. The one thing that this film originally started out as was a filmmaker's journey, and we had me on camera for some of the time in situations where I would go and ask people questions, and both me and the subject would be on camera. Eventually, we decided that was not the direction to go. One of the pieces that I really, really loved and wish that we could have had is a scene where we were just beginning in this whole thing. I believe it was our first trip to Minnesota. It was bitter cold outside, and we were filming the PGW headquarters. And we got there, and the parking lot was full of cars. And so we were like, well, this is interesting. Is there still stuff going on here as we're looking around? And so we said, well, let's go inside and just see if we can talk to somebody, see if somebody will tell us what's going on here. And so we walk inside, the door's open, and there's nobody there. It's a very nice lobby. I don't know if anybody in the room has ever been to the former PGW headquarters. But it was a very nice lobby, and you go in, there's newspapers set out, and a front desk, and nobody behind the front desk, just a phone. So we walk up to the phone, and my camera guy's following me, and I got the sound guy with the boom pole, because this is, kind of Michael Moore-esque, if you will, trying to be in the moment. And so there's a list of numbers. So I start at the top. Just no answer on the first one. Second one, we got somebody. I said, hi, my name is Ryan Frost. I'm doing a documentary, and we're down here in the lobby, and we wanted to know if we could talk to someone. And they said, hang on one sec, I'll send someone down. So I said, all right, guys, great, we're gonna be able to talk to somebody. Well, sure enough, we got a very chilly welcome. 3 people all came in at the same time. They came out of this main entryway from the rest of the building. We were just in the lobby. And so I walked up to them and introduced myself, and as soon as one guy saw the camera, he quickly ducks behind one of the walls. And so the whole thing was very unfriendly in nature. And so we said, can we talk to the press person? One of the ladies said, well, I am the press person. I said, well, can we do an interview? I gave her my card, and long story short, they declined. They told us to shut the camera off and would have nothing to do with us. And so it was just interesting to see the attitude and the atmosphere of what was going on over there in the immediate aftermath when folks were still taking up space.
So you didn't get the Michael Morris?
No, I mean, they did force us finally to shut off the camera, so we had as much footage as we could up to that.
We have a couple of questions here about the contributions and the connections between Norm Coleman and Amy Klobuchar and Petters and Kelly. And I'm going to paraphrase an old political statement. I know Amy Klobuchar. I like Amy Klobuchar. I consider Amy Klobuchar a friend. Obviously, I know Amy Klobuchar. But there's implications in the film that they had some sort of influence on getting Kelly appointed in some way, shape, or form. And the questions that are coming in from the audience are, what did they do with that money? Is that dirty money? Jim or Ryan or Billy or Thane, in your dealings, did you get their names bandied about? What do you have any evidence of their involvement in this beyond what we've seen in the movie?
Well, if there was transparency and full disclosure, it'd be simple to know. But you can't find anything out.
Anybody else?
We requested several interviews with Senator Klobuchar, to the point that when I was doing a trip to D.C., we went to her office. The camera was not running that time. We did it very formally. We went through the deputy press secretary, talked to the press secretary. We were declined all the way, and they wouldn't speak to us. So
I would say one thing is when you see these politicians, and I'm not going to talk about Amy or Norm, but the politicians, most of them, when they gave their money back, they gave it to charity. And it's amazing to me that, again, back to the victimless crime, you watch Janet Leck up there, that $5,000, or in Amy Klobuchar's case, it was, I think a couple $100,000 if you look at all the directions she got money from the Petters companies. But so they gave it back to charity, and I think in her case, she just gave back 1 year. So she went back, I think, for $5,000 and gave it to charity. And that money should go to the victims. I know it's a small amount of money, but it should go to the victims. And apparently the other, hundreds of thousands of dollars she got over the last 10 years, will not be accounted for.
By the way, if you listen to Mr. Kelly, when he did his one piece in the film, he says you go back to the beginning of the crime, and then you go get all that money. He seems to be very selective about who he's asked to give back the money.
I thought he took an elevator from the nuns or something. Did he get that back?
Well, I would just also add, we've talked about how some of the leading politicians and Doug Kelly haven't been responsive to interview requests. One of the things that I find angering or maddening is the unresponsiveness of virtually all of these people to answer questions in any forum. So in the U.S. Attorney's offices, for example, they've got all these public relations people who announce things, but the same thing. You try to go to a senator, the receiver, no one will talk. That's different. And people, from when I was a reporter, you could talk to all of these people, at least off the record, and people should be angry. Why aren't they responsive? Why aren't they speaking in public?
I would add quickly on the issue of political contributions. Tom Petters gave generously to Senator Coleman, Senator Klobuchar, various congressmen. But the point is, there's nothing remarkable about that. That is the way many wealthy business people operate. They give money to politicians of both parties, i.e. both sides of the street. When they get in trouble, they can call their senators of either party.
There's some questions from the audience as well about Judge Montgomery in this. And I know I've got a brother who's an attorney down in Texas. I think down there they call him Lars, but I think that's just the accent. And he's always told me, Bill, a good lawyer knows the law, but a great lawyer knows the judge. Aren't judges supposed to recuse themselves or not take part in things like this if they've got these types of connections?
Problem is, Minnesota, everybody's connected to everybody in the judicial system.
Let me also add that I've looked extensively at recusal law in some really appalling cases. And the problem is, so much is left to the judge themselves. And the standard should be very clear. Here's what the standard is. That if there's an appearance of impropriety, and even one independent person anywhere thinks there might be a problem, the judge is supposed to recuse. And the cases I've looked into, you could ask 100 people, and every single one would say, yes, it's outrageous. And what I've seen, and this the Alabama Siegelman case, is the Justice Department has filed and said not one single person in the United States would find impropriety. And the judges themselves might say that. So there's no one able to enforce this.
I also noticed in the film, and I was happy to see this because when I first saw it, I burst out laughing. I've been around politics and elections a long time, so I'm kind of used to political doublespeak. But when Doug Kelly was explaining how they were being totally transparent and showing bills to the judge in secret, and then she would tell what's being paid on that, and that was transparent. We have a couple questions from the audience about ex parte meetings and in camera, and how do these things get arranged without intervention or without any amendments after the fact? I guess this is a question from a lawyer, but can anybody speak to that?
Well, once again, I'm not going to opine on the facts of this case specifically, but in camera is appropriate in some circumstances. Those circumstances in which it is not in the interest of justice for the information to be public, the information can be simply shown to the judge and is not part of the public record. It's something we need to use very carefully because the fundamental premise of our justice system is that it's open and transparent. But there are exceptions. And in those exceptions where it truly is justified to keep something secret from the public, then we do that. Now, why the specifics of what lawyers did to earn fees off a bankruptcy state ought to be kept from the public, I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure that out. But there are situations where something should be kept from the public. But I'm not seeing it here. At least I'm not seeing it here quite
Can I
yet.
ask one question?
Yeah.
Have you ever known lawyers' bills to be so important to the judicial process that they're not shown to the public?
Not unless there's privileged communication to the bill. If there's privileged information, that's a communication between the lawyer and the client, then that is kept. The specific information there, but that would not be relevant in this case. So I don't get it. I'm still trying to figure out why the specifics of the bills is not disclosed to the public. Because I think it is a quite high bar that ought to be met, a stringent test to justify keeping information about anything going on in our judicial system from the public. Ex parte communication. There are situations where it is appropriate to have an ex parte communication with the judge. You need a temporary restraining order against a violent spouse. You need a temporary restraining order to get a hold of assets that are about to flee the country. There are circumstances which one party ought to be able to go in front of a judge without the other party being represented and say, I need at least temporary relief, because if I don't get it now, something drastic is going to happen. But once again, we are departing from the fundamental premise of our justice system that there ought to be all parties represented. So the ex parte communications ought to be few and far between. And there's basic principles that I would look to, as I say, I'm not going to opine on this specific case, but take it where you will.
A quick addition. Mr. Kelly said on screen there, we submit bills in secret, that is in camera, and then the judge releases them. He left out half of it. The judge is releasing redacted documents. So we don't know the entire story, correct?
Yeah, that which should be redacted is confidential lawyer-client communications. Privileged information, and that's all that should be redacted from the lawyer's bill.
Speaking of doublespeak, when I was watching this film, I didn't really realize that forfeiture really meant seizure, and I think that's the scary part of this for a lot of people. If you've been keeping up with the news here in Minnesota, we had the situation with the Metro Gang Task Strike Force, or whatever they were called. But we also see instances where people are losing their minivans or their SUVs because they're charged with a DWI or something, and they're taking this property before there's sometimes any crime being charged or a conviction taking place. Who can speak to that?
Lawyers?
I guess it's not a good idea.
I'd say generally I think forfeiture law is way out of control. And if we want to raise the penalty for drinking and driving, I think that's a good idea. Let's have a higher fine. Put people in jail for longer. But this shouldn't be a free-for-all for law enforcement to go and pick up an extra SUV or a Mercedes or whatever it is. Once again, forfeiture should be aimed at the assets of the criminals and those who assist the criminals, not at assets of innocent third parties, whether secured creditors, whether the victims of a crime, or anyone else. And forfeiture law, for a range of reasons, I've seen in many circumstances, I think it's out of control.
Well, I'll just add quickly, the chapter title that is in this book about it is called Forfeiting Justice, which is a two-word summary of the problem.
And by the way, I think it's a bigger question. Forfeiting your car or giving $25 billion to some bank because they screwed up, and that's our money, they're just taxing us and taking our money. It's all the same thing. Government's out of control.
We're getting kicked out of here in 10 minutes, so we just have a couple more questions, and I'd like to do a couple quick ones. I'm a business person. When I saw, and we did some brand valuation work for Mall of America when they were a client of ours, and Polaroid showed up in that brand valuation. So my jaw kind of dropped when I saw the figure that Polaroid was sold for. Any business people on the panel, some of our questions are, what should Polaroid have brought in a sale? I mean, I've got a number in my head, but I'd be interested in what any of you guys think.
I'll answer part of it, I guess. Today, the rumors are, Hilco bought it, I think, for $88 million, Hilco and Gordon Brothers, and the rumors floating around now are they value it about $350 to $400 million. That was, I think, 14 months ago or 12 months ago, something like that. So that just gives you an idea of what was on the table. But the situation here was the creditors were willing to put money into the company as long as they were willing to turn the company over to the creditors to run it, or to some independent third party to run it. They basically came up with a strategy to sell it off because they needed some money to fund the professionals. And so they cocked up a report that basically said they needed $200 million to run the company over the next 18 months. And the reality of it is when Hilco took over, I don't think they spent a dime. I think it's been cash flow positive since the day they started. So that just gives you an idea of to what extent people will go to kind of have the ends justify the means, so to speak.
I mean, the stock market had just crashed. Madoff came out weeks later. There was pessimism throughout all the financial markets. I explained to Kelly, I said, do not sell anything. This was right at that dinner where he made me buy that expensive bottle of wine. I said, we need to stabilize the assets before we sell them. And Dane's right. They needed to pay legal fees, so dump the company.
Another quick question. I think we have some Sun Country employees or former employees in the audience. Their question is, how did all this affect Sun Country? Is this why Sun Country went into bankruptcy? Was Sun Country already in bankruptcy? How did this affect Sun Country Airlines?
I reached out for Sun Country when I came back. I can't think of the gentleman's name, but Polaroid, well, let me rephrase this. We reached out for everybody. I was stonewalled by everybody. So I don't know how, it's lucky that Kelly didn't get his hands on it to liquidate that too. But I can't speak to that issue.
Yeah, I think the one big interesting thing in this case is how differently Sun Country was treated than Polaroid. But we didn't really study Sun Country since it was handled in a separate way. But it seems to me that they had the benefit of not getting caught up in this fire sale. But I still imagine they lost jobs and people and suffered greatly from the fact that their, I guess, owner was a fraudster.
Just to add something about buying and selling companies, I teach mergers and acquisitions law, and I've worked on deals with investment bankers. And it's, I have nothing against selling companies. It's great for the lawyers and eye bankers. But, we see a lot of companies in the United States get bought and sold, change hands several times. And I think we need to ask ourselves some serious questions about what does this mean for the employees of the companies when they are constantly being turned over like this. And of course, you go into an investment banker or a lawyer, you know, what should I do? The company's having some trouble. We're in trouble. Sell it. I hear that answer far too often. Sell it now. And it may be the answer. That is in the interest of the lawyers, investment bankers. It is sometimes the interest of the company, but I'm seeing companies being bought and sold an awful lot in the United States, and it doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, to highlight the financial services part of their industry, they make a fortune off the purchase and sale of these companies. And they have a huge vested interest in coming in and recommending to the company that these things are liquidated. And it's very often the people that suffer are the people at the very bottom who are not at that table at all.
And these are companies with a long, proud history. Polaroid, great company. I went to college down the street from there. Go by that headquarters. I mean, that's a wonderful company. Many people work very, very hard. We heard about this man who worked there 40 years. And I'm just wondering what we're doing for the employees and the communities when we're buying its own companies like this. And does it empower people like Patterson, this entire approach?
Last two questions, because I was told we have time for one more question. There's an old saying in politics and government that sunlight is a disinfectant, and it seems like these days news media, the people who are supposed to protect us, nobody seems to have the resources to find out what's going on in plain sight or right under our nose. Who's supposed to protect us now? If the media can't afford to do this, to investigate what needs investigating anymore, who's going to keep us informed? Who's going to keep us safe in this brave new world? Jim?
Well, that's not only a serious question, that's a scary question. I don't know the answer to that. For the news media, staying solvent is a higher priority than investigative reporting. Never mind investigative reporting the news. And so the media keep increasing their prices and degrading the quality of their product, and then they go crying about why they're losing public support. Who will substitute for reporters? I don't know. Bloggers won't. Perhaps privately funded advocacy groups will. But how credible are they if somebody's paying the pipeline? So I wish I could say something cheerier right now. And as far as investigative reporting, I suspect that most of Ryan's reporting and most of my reporting was stuff on the public record. It wasn't gumshoe, it wasn't second story jobs. It was looking at documents on the public record, which apparently local media aren't interested in.
Let me just add that I'm based in Washington. You can't underestimate the fear factor here. Dan Rather, just before he lost his job, he gave a talk at the National Press Club, and I don't think he realized what was coming for him, but he gave a talk, and he said the most important factor in newsrooms across the country, particularly in broadcast news, is that is fear. Fear that you will lose your job if you report a story that antagonizes the wrong people. And I'm certainly seeing that in my work, and I think it's a factor here. I mean, the paper, the largest paper here, was just coming out of bankruptcy in the same court system. They're laying off people right and left. It's just much easier to go into the prosecutors, Kelly, get their story. Last week, last quick thing, they had a whole story about a forfeiture deal worked out between Kelly and the U.S. Attorney's Office, where he's going to give all his creditors' money to the U.S. Attorney, and they quote him extensively about what a great situation it is for the victims. None of these people were quoted. No victims, no creditors are quoted because it's easier that way. Just go to the public official, the receiver, and ask, are you doing a good job? Oh, you are? Oh, thank you very much. And by the way, that's all over the country now.
I have to say that reporters are laboring under enormous disadvantage. The funds are not there, as we talked about the economic. The one thing, at least, that reporters and the public ought to have is information. And that's why, once again, it is very important for the justice system to very sparingly use something like the in-camera approach, where only the judge sees something and the public cannot, and ex parte communications. In Washington, of course, it was classifying information. If there's anything embarrassing, you just try and get it classified, and then declassifying it would be an enormous pain. And that's not appropriate. Information should be there for the public, unless there is an extremely strong reason for keeping it confidential.
Last question, and not to put too fine a point on it, but the question starts with, none of you live in Minnesota. And let me see how I can put this. We pride ourselves on having a system of clean government, well-educated, involved citizenry. We put a lot of trust in our court system and our elected officials to do the right thing, to play fair. So I think what's on a lot of people's minds here tonight is that how could this happen in a state like Minnesota? And the question is really, was Minnesota just incompetent in this situation, or were we corrupt?
I think if you want to keep the state clean, I think it's a relatively clean state. I've been to many other places. Came from Illinois, where we may end up with 2 governors serving their terms consecutively. But we want to keep this state relatively clean. We can't ignore facts. It is the obligation of the public, each and every one of you, to find out the facts, insist on finding out the facts, and not assume that everybody's honest, because everybody isn't honest anywhere. That's just not human nature. And if we assume everybody's honest, that's how someone like Hettler is going to get away with what he did. A lot of people assume he's honest. He must be nice. He's going to the high society events and giving money to charity and all that. Well, see a lot of those people back in New York, but people see through it. Some people do, some people don't. So Bernie Madoff did. If we assume everybody's nice and everybody's honest, that's the first way we're going to get scammed by someone like Hettler, and the first way we're going to lose our government.
By the way, Hettler wasn't from Minnesota either, was he?
I don't think this is a Minnesota problem. I'm talking to Andrew about this. This happens all over the U.S. I think the difference here, though, is there's probably more protection for sweeping it under the carpet. As you talked about earlier in Illinois, it would be no big deal. It happens all the time. And I think up here, people are just a little bit more defensive about it. But it happens all over the country. You shouldn't be defensive about it. These people, I don't even think it's really a personal situation. There's a lot of people that would have done exactly what Doug Kelly did. But, make $25 or $30 million. He's probably going to get $25 to $30 million of referrals. So you're talking a $50, $60 million payday with no recourse. Well, I bet you that if we took a sample in this room, probably the majority of you people would take that deal. And so I don't think it's more the system that's got to change. It's not Doug Kelly. It's not these judges. It's not the Justice Department. Or the people involved. It's really the system that creates this, and I think that everybody has to kind of look inward. And at the end of the day, every one of these people is appointed in some way by elected official, and I do think at the end of the day there's an opportunity to change the minds, I guess, of the elected official to make this a better system.
How will you disseminate this, Bill?
We're still in process of working out distribution deals. Nothing yet to report.
We're getting kicked out of here, but I'd like to thank the Uptown Theater. I'd like to thank
Sorry about the mics, guys. The house turned them all down. So that's what it is. Well, we ended at 2. Good job. 2. you enjoy the film? It's great. Yeah, thanks. Well, this light is too good.
It's very good.
It's too good. I can't film with it. They ought to have a cutoff point.
Worse than that, if you read the coordination agreement that he's put up to the court, it's supposed to be on September 14th, he's got a piece in there about the actual money he gets back from charities goes to pay his firm. And I was told that today by one of our attorneys. So
then make that aware to the public. Get the public aware that St. John's University funds went back to the attorneys.
Did he actually get money back from St. John's?
St. John's turned over some money. They were required to.
That's where it's going.
Yeah. So that's a real travesty. That ought to be.
But Tom Petters was financed by a diverse group of individuals and groups. So.
What about that? You can fold the table Well, that's the problem. There's no transparency. Think about it. Think about it.
Is it under your name or what?
Your opinions of the film. Opinion of the film. You can do that.
I thought it was wonderful and very revealing as to the injustices that the government is perpetrating.
Do you think that this is a production that's worthy of the networks?
Yeah, but I don't think they want to deal with it because they don't like to deal with the truth.
In your opinion?
I think Ryan did a great job on the film.
Okay, do you think it's worthy of the networks?
I'm not sure.
On the tragedy that will be coming as media departs and both reporters stop becoming investigators. If all they're doing is reporting and the people that
they're rewriting press releases and they're transcribing official interviews.
Right.
And that's just a terrible shame.
Well, they're not investigators. I don't know what they are, but they're not investigators.
Well, some of them are, and for instance, the young lady who is credited with the Kwa Fong Lee situation. Do you know about that? Okay. That woman found out about the Toyota recall and went back to the attorneys and said, hey, listen, folks, I think there's something here that we ought to done.
Yeah, I just saw that story this morning on
without her effort, he would still be in jail. And that would be another tragedy.
Yes, and how few are those reporters and those stories.
Right.
Every once in a while you'll see a headline, say this. That's what reporters are for.
Yeah.
And it's evaporating.
So whose fault is all of this?
All of this. What is this?
The Petters case, corruption in general, the fact that the system's broken down, this kind of thing.
One of the last or next to the last question was asked was, what's wrong with Minnesota? Are we corrupt? Well, I'm not going to label a state as corrupt, but I would say instead of corruption, I would use the word comfort. The prosecutors and the judges and the attorneys and the accountants were all too comfortable making deals with each other and for each other.
But that was against
so
the
that
law.
Justice does not get served.
Conflict of interest was involved. That's against the law. Appearance of impropriety, well, that's against the rules. I don't know if it's against the law. It's against the.
Yes, but I believe they were. I believe all kinds of judicial or legal ethics were violated. Whether it's illegal, whether they could be found guilty in a court of law, I don't know.
You don't have to answer this question. Do you think that Judge Montgomery should get off scot-free?
I believe Judge Montgomery should recuse herself from this matter.
Any opinion?
Well, I'm just Joe Citizen, but I would say that what's alarming is the fact that even if an appeal somewhere down the road comes back and says, hey, you guys made a mistake, at that point it's moot because everything's gone.
Because the assets are depleted.
So something needs to be done up
front.
Well,
the government got the assets with this forfeiture thing, so why can't we get it back from the government?
You know, I'd be curious to know. Here's a question. Do you think that when Kelly was in there with a dozen attorneys, that somebody from the creditor's side should have said, listen, we need to arm up and bring in a number of attorneys? Could there have been a check and balance here
I hadn't thought of that. The creditors thought that they had their guy, Billy Procida, in there, and,
Right.
And he's a pretty tough guy.
But he's only one guy.
And he's one guy. He wasn't anticipating that.
And he brought in a local Minnesota attorney,
and
but
he
maybe brought in the wrong firm or the wrong.
I can't speak to that.
I don't know who that person was.
Last question, right? Judge Montgomery allowed Doug Kelly to become receiver. Now, we've heard in the Star just recently, Doug Kelly admits wrongdoing before he became receiver. So, don't you think that there's something terribly wrong that disciplinary action should be taken upon a judge who puts I mean, she obviously knew that Doug Kelly was trouble. That's why she gave him immunity. Why? I mean, she gave him immunity.
In that ex parte proceeding, in that magic weekend, that when the prosecutors and Petter's attorney got together to decide that Petter's attorney would be the receiver, because it was secret and off the record, we don't know what was represented to Judge Montgomery. We don't know whether she was told.
The judge authorizes it. Everybody can cackle behind the doors, but the judge authorized that receivership.
Right, and if she did something wrong, there is a process by which you can bring a judge under scrutiny.
But they don't work, do they? I mean, where is the process ever work anywhere in the United States?
It isn't on the record that the judge was told that there was a receiver in place and that there were TROs freezing the assets. We don't know whether she was told that. It isn't on the record. She was later asked in a hearing. She did not answer. So, if she did not know that there was already a receiver in place, at least she has that excuse.
Now there's another hearing. Let's pretend that Minnesota actually could execute a citizen's grand jury, and she's there, on stand now as a witness, and now she's asked. What do you think that would have maybe an effect?
She says she would say.
Will there be a proceeding when we'll find out the truth?
Right.
I'm not optimistic about that. I'm not. Who has even called? Has any congressman or senator even called for hearings on what's happened here? There's no. Who's standing up for victims' rights?
Well, I know
nobody's
that
standing up for victims.
Senators and representatives have been asked by victims to have the hearings, and also that the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee were asked to have hearings, and of course, nothing's happened.
Do you mean the Minnesota House and Senate?
No, I'm talking federal.
I wasn't aware of that.
Well, let me just add this. Whatever Montgomery is making today, if she admits fault or if she leaves the judgeship, she will make far more in private practice. So there is no harm, as our Chief Justice will now experience. Chief Justice Eric Magnuson has stepped down from the Supreme Court. He will make far more than he made as our Chief Justice.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.